Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 10 team selection. As I mentioned within my previous videos, I'm still actually on vacation, so the plan for the next 2 weeks, up until I think the Game Week 11 deadline, will be for me to actually record videos abroad, but I will make sure that I'm watching all the Premier League games and staying updated with all things. For example, the EFL Cup matches have just been played. I've been able to react to them. I think the key thing coming out of that was actually the Nketiah injury, which now clearly means that Mateta's minutes will be close to perfect for the next fixture run ahead, and means he's effectively one of the easiest transfers to make, especially if you're looking for an impending transfer outside of someone like a João Pedro, for example. For Game Week 10, within the context of my own team, I think it's just easier to take a step back and have a look at my team from a Game Week 9 perspective. Game Week 9 was actually quite good for me. I ended up getting 47 points. No Van de Ven means no green arrow for myself. I'm still situated within a structure that I moved into for Game Week 9 because I used 3 free transfers to actually go from a Gyökeres structure into a Saka structure. Sort of thinking ahead and just envisioning what kind of team I wanted to have, especially knowing that I probably wouldn't have Salah for, let's say, Game Week 12 and beyond. I kind of thought, okay, it makes sense to actually go from Gyökeres to Saka if I have the luxury of being able to do it. And also moving into, let's say, a 3-5-2/4-4-2 hybrid structure with a 4.5 striker with, in my case, in Krupi Jr., as opposed to maybe, let's say, a Gu who wouldn't have been able to play in Game Week 9. That was sort of the thought I had in mind. So I brought in Krupi Jr., brought Saka in, and that left me enough money in the bank to actually go from Paqueta to Enzo, which I think was a huge upgrade, and Enzo had a lot of chances within the Sunderland match, even though Chelsea were, I think, still actually second best in Sunderland, were very impressive, considering they were away from home and got a really good result there, and have just shown strength to strength really every single week. Dewsbury Hall had a couple chances, nothing special. Virgil's disappointing, but the DEFCON numbers are definitely there. He's now the second best player in the game for DEFCON per 90, and that actually just shows, I think, when the Liverpool fixture run gets better. And of course, the joke can be, when does it start? Because it hasn't looked good so far for Liverpool, as they encountered yet another loss within the Premier League that maybe Virgil doesn't have great value, but I still think he's an easy hold for me up until Game Week 12. However, I also see him as a potential make weight if I'm not happy with the team whatsoever. So for example, if I roll this week in Game Week 10, I do land on Game Week 11 with another good Liverpool fixture on paper, but an opportunity, of course, to move away from someone like Virgil and use him as a cash cow to maybe, let's say, go down to a 4.5 or even a 4.1 type defender, which will then also allow me to upgrade Dewsbury Hall to whomever I really see fit. That is going to be better than, let's say, Dewsbury Hall as a perpetual play in the midfield compared to, let's say, Dewsbury Hall himself, or maybe trying to get out a back four when Anderson is still potentially out of the game. So that's kind of my review. We were sitting at 278,000 in the world. Yes, of course, I used a lot of my free transfers last week, but I'm actually happy to own Saka going forwards. We also got some pretty big news this week, so I wanted to almost feature that. Ben Crellin has actually already sort of iterated his thoughts on it. You can find actually, and even get access to Ben Crellin's team on FPL through the link in the description below. You can sign up to Fantasy Football Hub and you'll get access to, for example, his team, as well as his fixture calendar and almost all the other tools that you have available, which includes, for example, suggested transfers from the AI team rating tool. And also, I think a great deal, which is 50% off up until the end of this month, but also the money back offer for not winning your mini league. So if you follow the T's and C's there, you'll get your money back. And that's all I'll say there. But as I said, link in the description below if you want to have a look at any of those tools. So based on sort of what Ben has suggested, and I think Talon Nadim is sort of congruent with those kind of thoughts, the idea is that Arsenal drawing Crystal Palace within the FA Cup actually does create potential fixture chaos where we might actually have a sizable blank game week now in game week 17. So the key thing here is, and I think this Tyler tweet pretty much encompasses it. The idea is Crystal Palace actually reaching the quarterfinals here opens the door for potential blanks in 17 and maybe a double in game week 16. They are not linked together necessarily. I think it comes down to how the fixtures land and how they're planned, and of course whether Palace potentially accept their role within the fixture pie, because they're involved in so many competitions themselves, right? They're also included within the European Conference League, one of the few teams within Premier League to actually be within it, and that's kind of the main talking point. As far as Arsenal, that being the draw actually means that we're expecting for, let's say, potential blank of Everton and Arsenal, and then also Leeds and Crystal Palace in Game Week 17. So therefore, there's a possibility of Everton and Arsenal actually moving towards double game week 16. So that means an Arsenal double game week is a small potential that we have right now. So something to think about at this moment is if you haven't used your free hit and you're actually planning to use the free hit over the next few weeks, I've almost closed that option for myself. I'm now actually waiting to use the free hit on hopefully what is a blank or a double and trying to optimize around that. Especially if we get this Arsenal double, it will be so easy to actually play the Arsenal free hit when they blank. At the same time, if I guess you're underinvested in Arsenal for whatever reason, you can probably consider that as an opportunity to free hit into the best triple up of Arsenal possible. I think it just makes sense to simply save the free hit now for the blank because we're all going to own Arsenal. To me, they're the best team in the league by far, and it makes a lot of sense to just simply use that as the opportunity. We were already looking for free hits to use when Arsenal didn't have good games. Now you're actually getting to use potentially the free hit when Arsenal just simply don't have a game at all. And I think that's much better. So that's kind of a little bit of context in terms of how that's changed my transfer plan. So if I compare back to my transfer plan video earlier this week, I was still angling for potential free hit opportunities, but because, of course, of the Crystal Palace win and the draw as well, which has sort of lumped Arsenal into this pie, I think it becomes quite interesting thinking about the future fixture landscape. And now it opens an opportunity for people to use the free hit, or at least, pencil that in somewhere down the line. At the same time, I think if you've already used the free hit, you're getting your 5 free transfers at Game Week 16 for AFCON, so you should still be able to manage this kind of blank game week aspect of things in Game Week 17. And the double game week, as I said, is not guaranteed. So, back to sort of my own team for this week, I think it'd be useful also to have a look at some of the odds. 1105, of course, presents them himself on his website at 1105.com, so you can have a look at them there for all the Premier League data and almost predictions that stem from his team strength and even player strength model for fantasy. For this week, I think what is worth pointing out. I think we've got really good games here on hand. What I will say is that the Arsenal clean sheets, it's a good time to almost look at it and just bask in how impressive this Arsenal team are. I think if I cast my mind back to last season, Arsenal were a team that sometimes actually got clean sheet odds above 50%, but now this is almost consecutive weeks where I'm seeing Arsenal close to 50% and way above it. So their level as a defense has actually only improved from last season, where they actually had really good numbers, but actually didn't get a lot of clean sheets. Now we're seeing clean sheets. We're also seeing much better numbers and general all-around dominance in the league. But I think the bigger and wider trend amongst this is actually that the amount of projected goals that we're seeing for Premier League teams has dropped, right? So teams are just scoring less. If anything, we're seeing a larger part of that pie being set pieces. So, here is where Arsenal come in. Not just a set piece only team, though, of course. I think we recognize that they still have some good open play threat, but it's just the fact that they're all conquering in different aspects, and especially just on defense. So yeah, I just wanted to point out how ludicrous this Arsenal clean sheet odd is. And I think this is also why people are considering something like a Gabriel captaincy, which I'll talk about in a moment when I go into my captaincy section. At the same time, I think, what are actual other good games on offer? Fulham, for sure, in terms of clean sheet odds. To an extent, this is a week where if you sort of remove Arsenal from the equation, Brighton are actually extremely high up on clean sheet odds as well. I think the Crystal Palace clean sheet odds here look a little bit low. I think one thing I'll mention with 1105's model is that Brentford has always been a team that's been well rated. So maybe there could be a gap here between the Crystal Palace clean sheet odds and, let's say, what the markets would predict. But I think these are very fair regardless. Brentford have actually looked really promising as of late. So I think, if anything, his model is probably onto something and has been for a while. As far as some of the other clean sheet odds on offer, I'm sure a lot of people will see Liverpool and Man City high, relatively speaking, at 35%. But this is the whole point, right? It's 35%. This is sub 50. So we're still expecting teams to lose their clean sheets. I think we don't need to necessarily overreact to Liverpool being super poor and thinking that their clean sheet odds are going to be less than what they are at present. So this is still relatively low for the consideration of this week. And as I said, within the overall context of there being less goals within the league, it just means that clean sheet odds will actually naturally go up. Everton have a really good fixture in hand as well. So that kind of, to me, signifies a good opportunity to play someone like Dewsbury Hall, potentially if I need to within my team. But I'd love to have Anderson back fit and available for his Wolves game. Newcastle have a great game as well. We know that the particular weakness of West Ham this season has been the set pieces. And so, of course, you can look towards some Newcastle threats, including Waltemad, who would obviously be able to help you support almost conquering that little weakness that West Ham have, which isn't unfortunately so little. From the attacking point of view, I think you have a lot of mixed games here anyways. The clean sheet odds are not above 40% for any team except for Arsenal, so that already indicates a lot of sort of both teams to score type scenarios. And I think, none more than, let's say, for example, Nottingham Forest versus Man United. So that's a good opportunity. Spurs versus Chelsea as well. Probably another good opportunity for us to see teams scoring goals on both ends and a lot of goals. Maybe even, let's say, City versus Bournemouth. So I think this is a week where, of course, it's not a great fixture for someone like Semenyo, but still, I wouldn't feel too bad about playing someone like Semenyo in a week like this because City just haven't been too impressive overall. And it's not like there are opposing teams that have massively better odds that we're not already invested into. So just something to mention. As far as my own team, this is how I plan to actually line up for this weekend. So as it stands, I'm hoping, and this is pure copium right now, that Anderson versus Wolves at home will be something that I can play over. Now, he wasn't available for the EFL Cup squad. He wasn't even a part of the match squad. But I think there are circumstances where you have a player and he's recovering from an injury, and maybe you don't rush him back too early. And potentially Wolves at home is too early for Anderson. So I think my inclination is that Anderson won't be available for this game. So I'll just assume that he's not going to be available, and my first bench will be my sort of starter within this team. But hoping that, as I said, Anderson is available because it's such a good game. He's a great def corner, and Wolves have been really, really poor when it comes to the sort of offensive point of view. Now, they scored a couple goals versus Chelsea in the EFL Cup, but I think that's also Chelsea letting them back into the game more so than anything. Double Arsenal defense will definitely be played. Ryan Gabriel. I'm also going to play Lacroix. Now, one of the biggest things that I'll miss on this weekend clearly is going to be Daniel Munoz, who has risen a lot in terms of just his performances as of late and how people have reacted to it, considering the sort of Palace fixture run ahead. Lacroix has not proven to be much better than Chris Richards. However, Chris Richards is now a small doubt because I think Glasner has mentioned that the idea was for him to be readied up for the weekend for Brentford at home and for him to actually rest the Liverpool game. But I think that still creates a small little doubt for Chris Richards and just maybe his overall, I guess, fitness condition for the few weeks ahead. So I think I'm going to hold on to Lacroix for now, but I still know that he's a potential cash cow. Virgil as well, just given the clean sheet odds being okay and him being a really good def corner, plus Aston Villa actually giving away a lot of def con, just makes me think I should still be holding Virgil this week. And I don't think it's necessarily a need to move Virgil into Munoz in this case, partially because I would also like to, still open up an opportunity to maybe go into Sarr over the next few weeks if I can still leave room for a transfer to go towards him. So I will be holding Virgil, and I think reluctantly almost thinking ahead with Liverpool and actually just saying that fixture run starting from game week 12, which starts with Nottingham Forest at home, is what I really want to be targeting with Virgil van Dijk for this moment in time. As far as the midfield, I'll be fielding Semenyo, who's probably the weakest midfielder that I have for this week, just because it's the City away game. Enzo's been really interesting as of late. He also has a pretty poor fixture to Tottenham away, and we know Tottenham have shored up a lot as a defense. But I think one thing that we can probably give credit towards a team like Chelsea is that their offense has still looked okay for the most part, despite sort of the lack of threat coming from João Pedro. If anything, it's someone like Enzo this season who's actually gotten a lot of non-penalty underlying stats and proven to actually even get, for example, lots of shots on target, a little bit more than even João Pedro. So he is one player that I quite like, especially since he's most probably going to be on penalties, right? It could still be João Pedro. He might have a pity penalty on the cards. We know that Delap is not going to be a part of this game because he's suspended. But yeah, I would love to have Enzo potentially get a penalty over this run of games, which we've bought him for. Bruno is someone that I'm going to hold. Yes, of course, I think Mbeumo is a fantastic pick. I actually recommended Mbeumo alongside Bruno with sort of one of my recent TikTok videos, which kind of looks at what transfers you should focus on within the short term. And I think that was sort of done last week before Mbeumo had a great game. But does that change my mind in terms of Bruno? No, because I actually watched the game and I actually thought Bruno had plenty of chances to score himself. And of course, I mean, even if you revisit that Ahmad chance where he drew a potential penalty versus De Kuiper, I think that could very, very much could have just been a Bruno goal right there, notwithstanding the chances that he actually got himself within the match in open play. As far as Saka, it's really a positive. I think that Arteta just confirmed that he was sick. He actually scored coming off the bench versus Brighton within the AFL Cup as well, which I think gives me a little bit more confidence for the weekend. Overall, Saka has had a pretty unimpressive season so far, but I think he's been unfortunate in the sense that he's come back for all the tough games for Arsenal, barring, let's say, that West Ham match, and he probably hasn't gotten himself the full fitness and sort of full speed just because of the stop-start nature of his season. So looking forward for him to sort of build on something here with the Brighton goal. And as I said, looking forward to sort of being an owner of Saka over, let's say, Gyökeres in the short term, because actually Gyökeres' ownership in the meantime is actually much higher than Saka. So I feel like there is a bit of an edge here in actually owning Saka for this week, where a lot of people still actually are owning Gyökeres. And of course, in terms of price action, I've benefited already from moving away from someone like Reinders, escaping from his price falls, and then actually moving into Saka ahead of time, where I think he's also potentially going to get another price rise before the deadline. As far as Semenyo, I think he's just an easy play. Do I need to necessarily take the risk in terms of effective ownership? I don't think so at this stage. I'm quite happy with my rank. I also think he just still is better than, for example, something like Dewsbury Hall, despite the fixture gap, so nothing to do there. In the front line, sorry, I will be playing Haaland and Mateta. A lot of people are moving into Mateta now, and of course, he's no longer a differential pick, but at the same time, I've gotten the price rises from Mateta. I got the hat trick. There's nothing I can really say in terms of complaining. I think part of FPL is acknowledging that sometimes you might be ahead of the curve a little bit with owning a pick. And if everyone sort of flocks towards your pick, it doesn't mean that, you need to suddenly get out of someone like Mateta. If he's a good pick, especially with, as I said, the Nketiah injury, he's just a good pick. Just enjoy that as a manager. And if you feel like you're late with Mateta, I don't think you are. I mean, this Palace run is literally just about to start, and you've just come away from the worst possible fixture in the league, which was Arsenal away, where Palace just looked really solid as a team once again, lining up versus Arsenal. So with Haaland this week, I think the biggest question is on captaincy, so we can quickly jump into that segment. Now, I wanted to almost take the stance of just thinking about odds for a moment, and just thinking about which circumstances where I would want to have Gabriel as a captaincy versus, let's say, someone like Haaland, who actually has a pretty good home game in hand. So one way that I think I would probably address this is just simply looking at, for example, the odds that Haaland has to score for this weekend. And as it stands, I believe that the odds for Haaland to score this weekend are still very, very high. So when I actually look at, for example, let's say the projected goals for this weekend, I think Haaland is somewhere in the range of, let's say, 70% to actually score a goal in Game Week 10. Small chance, of course, like a 10% chance of getting an assist. I think cumulatively speaking, like that is maybe, let's say, enough for me to circumvent, let's say, that Arsenal clean sheet. If we remember, and cast our eyes back to, let's say, Alertify's odds, I think that was 60% to get a clean sheet versus Burnley. Some people might actually just impute that as basically that is a clean sheet, right? But you can't really do that from a sort of math equation, or you can apply the same sort of logic towards Haaland. And at that point in time, if Haaland scores a goal, for example, he is much more prone to getting bonus. Whereas when I actually look at the Arsenal team this weekend, sure, Arsenal have been pretty non-threatening, I guess, in open play compared to, let's say, how good they are as a team, right? But at the same time, they're still a top half open play team in terms of attacking numbers. And so I still think when you're playing a team like Burnley, who have proven to be the worst team so far on defense, specifically in open play, then there's a great opportunity actually for a lot of the Arsenal players, such as the attackers, including Gyökeres, whoever gets to play on the left on the weekend because Martinelli is out injured, most probably Trossard, even someone like Eze, or Saka, who's going to be a big piece of that pie, potentially on penalties once again, to actually get goals versus Burnley, and therefore take away from the sort of max bonus scenario, which Gabriel will tend to benefit from. At the same time, you could probably make the quite critical argument that someone like Rice, Saka, or Gabriel are most likely to be involved versus a team like Burnley, because Arsenal still create most of their chances through set pieces, and it's not like Burnley have been an impressive set piece defense at all. So I can kind of see the argument for going for Gabriel here, but I still think that Haaland just has a very, very impressive game. We also saw another great striker in Mateta actually rack up absolutely obscene numbers versus Bournemouth. Now, I don't think that's some sort of positional trend here. It's not like Bournemouth have gone to every single team in the league and actually started giving strikers chances like, it's some sort of lottery or charity rather. But it is Haaland. It is the best striker in the league. It is the best chance getting striker in the league, if you want to put it like that. And he does not really miss often. So I think I would still go with Haaland here. My vice captaincy is actually going to go with Saka, because if I follow my own logic in terms of, do I think this is quite a dominant Arsenal game potentially on paper, I think this is very valid to be a good Saka game, because if I think Saka could have played something like 90 minutes on this specific match, then I just see the opportunity for him to actually get a pretty big haul versus a pretty bad team in Burnley, unfortunately. Just given that what I've seen so far, sure, we can sort of point towards, let's say, West Ham and Wolves being much, much worse in terms of some of the kind of actual numbers that, let's say, these teams have achieved so far. But I think in terms of underlying stats, I really don't see Burnley as far and far away from a team like Wolves or West Ham in the meantime, right? For the most part, if you look at the underlying stats so far, Burnley are actually probably the worst team in the league. And actually, Nottingham Forest are not too far behind, but of course, they've had a change in manager. So I still think Burnley are the worst team in the league, and I'll be targeting them as such through the vice captaincy of Saka. If you want to go with Gabriel, I think that's totally valid. I'm not going to criticize that. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I can kind of get it because I think there's an aspect to, especially with myself, someone who uses models or even, let's say, looks at market level data, for someone to actually make the sort of inference that if you are sort of ahead of the trend and maybe you believe, for example, let's say this league has suddenly just become completely dominated by set pieces, Arsenal will get a clean sheet 100%, then I guess your core belief in these sort of things will sort of naturally lend yourself towards a Gabriel captaincy, and I think that makes sense. Part of this too, I think, is also because Haaland has just blanked versus Aston Villa, and people now sort of see the opportunity to go against Haaland's captaincy. But I still think this is actually a really good Haaland game. In contrast to, for example, Aston Villa away, where probably actually the peers in terms of captaincy weren't that interesting last week, but still outscored him, right? In a Salah, in a Bruno, in a Saka even, who got a clean sheet. So those are my thoughts in terms of Game Week 10. That's going to be my team selection. If, let's say, Anderson's not available, I do not plan to make a move. I think I will just roll. I will simply just play Kieran Dewsbury-Hall. He's first on my bench within my team. After that is a bit of a tricky situation. I think just depending on the Evan Nilsson news, I think I'll have, if Evan Nilsson's out for the game, I'll have Krupi Jr. ahead of Senesi versus Man City. If Evan Nilsson is probably back in the team somehow and maybe fit to play, I'll probably actually just swap the order around, maybe have Senesi a little bit ahead of Krupi, hope for a sort of circumstance where, let's say, Senesi is able to get defensive contributions. He wasn't able to get defensive contributions in the previous match, but I think that's also because of how much sort of dominance Bournemouth had over the ball versus Nottingham Forest compared to, let's say, most scenarios where I guess they're able to sort of lose the ball and sort of recollect the ball with the sort of high press that they have in place with the way that Senesi plays as well, specifically himself. So that's kind of my thoughts. I think when it comes to sort of transfers going forwards, as I said, the soonest time that I think I'll make transfers would probably be Game Week 12, where I have an opportunity to maybe reconsider sort of what midfielders I have, whether I like them or not, because we know that Noni Madueke is coming back too. I'd like to see how that sort of impacts Saka's minutes, even though I think in the short term, there's really no impact because we know that Martinelli's injured. We know that Noni Madueke is probably nowhere near up to speed. He probably needs almost like a new preseason in much the same way someone like Wisa needs a new preseason if he's to come back into, let's say, this Newcastle side in the future. So that's kind of where my thoughts lie right now in terms of Game Week 10 of my team selection. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.